Good afternoon. Welcome to today's producer webinar for Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging and Paper, hosted by DivertNS. My name is Stephanie Anselm, and I am the Principal Consultant and EPR Implementation Specialist at FDB Consulting Services. I'll be serving as your moderator for today's presentation. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on DivertNS's website afterward. The presentation itself will last about 20 minutes. During the presentation, all participants will be muted. However, we encourage you to utilize the question and answer section to post your questions throughout the presentation. We will have ample time to address these questions during the Q&A session at the conclusion of the webinar. When exiting the webinar, participants will be presented with a pop-up window containing a brief survey. Your feedback will greatly assist DivertNS in planning future producer webinar sessions. I'll now hand it over to our presenters from DivertNS to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Steph, and thanks to all of you who have joined our webinar today. We appreciate you taking the time. My name is Alana McPhee, and I'm the Executive Director of EPR Compliance at Divert Nova Scotia. I've worked with Divert Nova Scotia for 21 years and spent my entire 25-year career in waste management. So I'm really excited to speak with you all on this topic today. And I'll hand it over to Jackie from Divert.
Welcome, everyone. Some of you I may have chatted with an email back and forth as you were doing your registration process over the last few months. My background is in compliance. I've worked in the compliance and regulatory field for about 20 to 25 years, and I am new to Divert, but not new to this process. So thanks, Alana.
Great, and while I will be delivering the presentation today, certainly Stephanie and Jackie are both actively involved in standing up our oversight division, and certainly they'll be helpful when we get to the question and answer part of the presentation today. So I'm just going to shut off my camera now, just as we get into the formal presentation. But before we go into the formal presentation, I would just like to acknowledge that in the spirit of reconciliation, we do acknowledge that we are on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we honor them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We are grateful for the treaties of peace and friendship. We are all treaty people. So in terms of today's agenda, we're covering quite a few topics. We'll be looking, we've already introduced ourselves, but we'll talk to you a little bit about Divert Nova Scotia. Certainly high level, talk about the regulations here in Nova Scotia. We'll be looking at the producer timeline and with a real focus on activities that are coming up in 2024. We'll speak to you about pro-delegation. That's something we'll be enabling here in our province to support producers in their obligations. And then certainly our two main milestones this year are around supply data reporting and readiness reporting. So we'll get into a little bit of detail on those topics with much more to come in future sessions. We'll talk to you a little bit about some decisions we've made so far in terms of cost recovery and highlight some of the things coming up next. So just to start, a little bit about Divert Nova Scotia. I'm sure some of you on the webinar today are familiar with Divert Nova Scotia, just because we have been around since, 1996, so 25 years plus of championing recycling and waste diversion. We're probably mostly known for our work in running the tire and beverage container recycling programs here in the province. But more recently, in August of 2023, we were designated as the administrator for the EPR for PPP regulations. And that was a role we saw coming and certainly advocated to government that it's a role that we were really interested in taking on. So what's happening here in our organization is really sort of a bit of a shift in terms of creating this new division that is fully responsible for oversight just of the printed paper and packaging program. And I would like to point out that the oversight division is completely separate from stewardship operations. There will be some shared corporate costs, so things like communications and IT support. However, other costs, myself and Jackie as an example, we're 100% dedicated to that oversight division And our finances, again, from oversight are completely separate from our stewardship activities. So enough about us, I guess, moving on to our regulation. So as I noted, our regulation was announced in August of 2023. And the actual implementation date for, I guess, the industry taking on recycling programs here in Nova Scotia is slated for December 1st, 2025. So that gives a full 2.5 years to transition to full EPR here in our province. I would say, our government worked really hard in terms of trying to align our regulation as much as possible to other key jurisdictions. And I would note, we are very closely aligned to Alberta and Ontario. And a couple of things to note around that, things like our reporting categories are similar. We've also got a small producer exemption defined in our regulations. So again, I think it was really good for government to find alignment where they could. And certainly as an oversight body, we're working to find ways to harmonize our oversight approach with other jurisdictions. So we've been talking a lot to other jurisdictions and asking lots of questions really to find out, lessons learned in other jurisdictions, really asking questions like, if you could start over again, what would you do differently so that we can implement those kinds of decisions? And really looking for best practices that will improve efficiency and really keep a really strong eye on harmonization. We know that's important to producers. So whatever we can do to harmonize our oversight approach to make it look, feel, seem similar in other jurisdictions. So in terms of the timeline, this timeline that we have here, which is on our website, it does extend from January 1st, 2024, all the way through to May 31st of 2027, outlining key milestones. Again, today we're really just going to focus on what's happening in 2024 and sort of the upcoming milestones in October 1st. I would note January 1st was our registration deadline, and I would like to thank all of the folks on the webinar today. You are the registered producers, and we appreciate you coming into our EPR portal to create your accounts. It is still open for registration, the portal is, so we do encourage other producers as they identify as being obligated to come into that system. And again, so it will remain open. But really the next key milestone is October 31st. And there's a couple of things that are required at that point. So initial supply reporting is required by producers as of that date. And there's also a requirement in the regulation for what's called a readiness report. And we're going to touch on both of those things in upcoming slides. I would just note on a timeline perspective that beyond 2024, one of the key moments in time is December 1st, 2025, and that's the actual program implementations when producers become fully responsible for curbside recycling. And then there's also some dates along the bottom of the timeline related to supply data and annual reporting deadlines related to supply data that will eventually transition to annual reporting in 2027. So to give you a quick producer registration update, we're happy to say we're over 340 producers registered to date in the province. As I noted, we are still accepting registration, so that is an ongoing activity. And we're doing lots of work with many stakeholders to identify potential obligated producers. So we're working with local business associations, we're talking to other jurisdictions, we're certainly working with Circular Materials, who's a producer responsibility organization, to understand who we might be missing and who we might want to reach out to. We certainly understand the importance of identifying as many obligated producers as possible to help create a level playing field. And I would note, in terms of producer responsibility organizations, January 1st was also the deadline for those organizations to register with Divert Nova Scotia. And at this time, we do only have the one registered pro, and that's Circular Materials. So related to pro delegation, the next few slides, we are going to discuss the specific obligations of producers that are coming up in 2024, as noted in our regulation. I would say it's important to note that our regulation does enable a producer to delegate to a pro, and that pro can undertake certain activities on their behalf. So in the next few slides, we will highlight how a pro can support producers in meeting their 2024 obligations. And again, those are the activities such as supply reporting, readiness report, and so on. And really the pro delegation piece, when we open our portal up for increased functionality and the supply reporting aspect in July, that's when producers will be able to delegate a pro. So in terms of our initial supply data reporting, we are aiming for a July 8th opening of the portal, and that would be when producers could come in and provide their initial supply data. The data that we would be looking for is based on calendar year 2023. And as I noted, producers will have the option in our portal to either supply the data themselves, or they can delegate to the pro and the pro can provide the data. I would just note that in our regulation, if the pro is providing the data on behalf of the producer, that an attestation is required. So that would just be something to be signed off by the producer. But yeah, and then in terms of categories, we'll have 5 categories in our system, similar again to other jurisdictions, so they should be familiar, but we're looking at paper, rigid plastic, flexible plastic, glass, and metal. And I would just note again, October 1st is the deadline for the initial supply data to be provided to Divert Nova Scotia. So beyond 2024, well, there are milestones around additional supply data reporting. And so again, they were noted on the timeline, but we would be looking for producers to provide supply data in 2025 and 2026. And that would eventually transition to annual reports in 2027. One thing we did want to note today, which is the second box here on the slide, is that producers will not receive their initial cost recovery invoice until 2025. And I wanted to point out it's going to be issued independently of the supply data reporting. So again, this was a lesson learned from other jurisdictions. It was suggested to decouple supply data reporting from invoicing. And so at this point, we've made the decision that we would receive the supply data. We would look to verify the data before issuing invoices. And our understanding is that should reduce any adjustments that we need to make in our systems, which should increase the efficiency of how we provide oversight. In terms of our role in supply data and what that looks like, it's really serving the purpose of helping us understand the producer landscape here in our province. It's going to help us help inform our compliance and our oversight activities. And really, as we go into our fee setting process, we know that the data will be important as we run our information through a model that we're going to create so we can understand if our fee setting methodology is going to work or if we need to make some tweaks. So the next, again, big milestone is our readiness report that is due in as of October 1st, 2024. So this is outlined in Section 9 of the regulations. The readiness report can be submitted by the producer, or that activity can be delegated to the pro to complete on behalf of the producer. In other jurisdictions, this would be similar to what's been called a stewardship plan. But I guess in our province, we see the readiness report as more of a detailed work plan. And again, really with an eye on ensuring the successful implementation of the program on December 1st, 2025. In terms of our role in the readiness report, so we have prepared a guidance document for the readiness report, which does outline key requirements. So things like project deliverables, timelines. There is a consultation requirement in our regulation, so that's been detailed out. Certainly things like budget and how program performance will be managed, those things are all laid out in the guidance document. And that has in fact been shared with the pro at this time. So we've shared it with Circular Materials, and I understand they are currently working on their readiness report. But certainly if an individual producer is choosing to write their own readiness report, we're willing to share that guidance document directly with an individual producer as well. After October 1st, so once we've received the readiness report, our role is really to review it, ensure all the pertinent information has been provided that will ensure that successful launch. And so if there are any gaps that have been identified or further information that's required, we would be going back to the pro or back to the producer to make sure we gather that information before further activity takes place in terms of program implementation. In terms of fees, again, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of establishing our fees, but we have made a few decisions to date that we did want to share. So certainly the regulations allow Divert Nova Scotia to recover our costs that are related to oversight. We have decided we will not be charging our fees until 2025. Again, no specific month at this point, but likely in the second part of the year. In terms of our portal, we've decided there will be functionality and the invoices would be available to the producers directly in the portal. But I would point out that producers will have the option to delegate to the pro, and the pro can pay their invoice on their behalf. That would not be functionality built into the portal, but that could happen outside of the portal. So we do understand that that's something many producers may want their pro to do on their behalf, so that will be facilitated. And I would just say also we have started our fee methodology research. So first step in that was really creating a fee setting policy. It has been drafted. It is going to sort of our leadership for approval and input very shortly. And I would say also our research in terms of our methodology has begun. We understand this is a lengthy process. There's many steps involved, including a very important step of consulting with producers. But we're working now to get that information in writing, to get that laid out. And certainly it would provide lots of details in terms of how we allocate our startup and our ongoing operational costs to producers. And wow, already here, but what's next? So I would just say today's webinar was really just to give a high-level overview on some of the activities happening in 2024, but we are looking to have another webinar in May that will delve more deeply into supply data reporting and also the readiness report. And as I did note, we have started the process of setting our oversight fees. We're aware this is a very comprehensive, complex process, many moving parts, but we've got it, I believe, well underway. And at this point, looking at timelines, it's likely that it would be early 2025 when we come out to producers and have consultation on our fee setting methodology. So we'll do our best to keep you informed as we move forward. So before we move into questions, I guess I want to just share some important links. I would note, again, we're going to distribute this PowerPoint to everyone that's registered in our system, and it will be available on our website. So, but I would point out we've got our own EPR oversight webpage on the Divert NS webpage. We are looking to LinkedIn as sort of our social media presence for any updates related to our EPR oversight activities. So you can, if you don't follow us now, please join. And then circular materials, certainly if you're not familiar with them, we would encourage you to reach out to Circular Materials as the only registered producer responsibility organization in the province at this moment. And we do have our own EPR support email. So again, if you've got any questions at all, comments, we're always happy to hear from you through our email, and we'll do our best to get back to you very quickly. So with that, last slide is questions. And maybe we'll turn our cameras back on. And I know Steph is planning to kind of work through the Q&As that are already in the webinar, but certainly if there's others, you can type them in as we go.
Yes, thanks, Alana. So we'll start with our first question from Anthony. And the first question is Divert NS equivalent to RIPRA in Ontario?
So I would say equivalent in the sense we're providing oversight. So again, but we are different in that, first of all, we are only providing oversight for printed paper and packaging in Nova Scotia. And perhaps different in that, again, We've created a separate division, but we'll continue to operate our beverage and tire program. So that's happening away from our oversight activities. I'm not sure if there's anything further to that or.
Thanks, Alana. We'll go to the next question from Sylvan. The question is, can we see a list of the registered stewards in Nova Scotia?
Right. So at this time, we're just working through some privacy policy information. So it's interesting. We've had a few different privacy related questions in the last month or two, and we're learning that the legislation in Nova Scotia is different than other jurisdictions. But our plan is to share as much as we can, be as transparent as possible. So I'm hoping in the short term we'll be able to have that list on our website. But I would just encourage you to, stay tuned.
So the next question is from Paul. The question is, are the material categories that you mentioned the final reporting categories that will be used in the Divert NS portal?
Right. So yeah, those are the categories, and those are in fact outlined in the regulation. So the regulation lays out those categories, but additionally in Nova Scotia, there is a ministerial standard. I believe both of those documents can be found on our website, and the ministerial standard actually gets into the targets. So over time, that will share the targets show sort of what you have to meet in each of those categories. So those are all there. They're all laid out. I don't expect anything to change, and my understanding is they're similar to other jurisdictions. So,
All right. On to our next question from Freeman. What if our paper waste we're reporting is compostable as well as recyclable?
Great question. I know compostable packaging is, a really interesting and growing sector. I would suggest right now all the material would be considered recyclable. Any of the, even though it could go in a green card, I think any packaging that's destined to Nova Scotia that is ending up in blue bags is what we're capturing. So yeah, I know there had been discussions at one point in Nova Scotia because we have such rigorous composting and recycling programs. There was, a suggestion that maybe this program should extend to composting facilities and what's going into green cards, but kind of stops at the blue bag. And yeah.
Okay. So the next question from Anna, I think we've already addressed. Yes, the meeting is being recorded and slides will be made available on Divert NS's website.
Sure.
Okay. So the next question is anonymous, but there's a clarification being requested about, does Divert NS set the fees or does Circular Materials?
Sure. Great question, and a very important point to, I guess, lay out here. So Divert Nova Scotia is able to collect fees for cost recovery related to our oversight activities. So we will be charging a fee, an administration fee essentially. Circular Materials will be charging a different fee, and their fee is really based on the cost to collect, process, and market all of the materials that go into blue bags. So theirs is more of an operational cost, and again, a cost attached to running the programs that will service all of Nova Scotia. So two different costs from two different agencies. And again, I believe that's very similar to, again, what's happening in Ontario, what's happening in Alberta.
Thank you. So the next question, I think, is a duplicate about whether Divert will publish a list of registered producers.
Sure.
So I think we've already addressed that. That's still being investigated, and we'll keep you posted on that. So I'll move on to the next question from, I believe, Manny. So the question is, if you could confirm that the small producer is exempt from registration, reporting, and the readiness report. Small producer, sorry, the question just kind of gives a bit more
sure.
context. Small producer is only required to maintain the record of the sales, but not to submit it to Divert NS. The small producer equals a gross, the definition of a small producer, I think, is what is being stated here is the gross annual revenue in Nova Scotia less than 1 million, or a producer that supplies less than 1 ton of designated material in Nova Scotia in a year.
Correct. So yes, so those are the thresholds. Again, it's $1 million. If you're less than $1 million in revenue into Nova Scotia, or you're less than 1 ton of designated materials into Nova Scotia, or if you're registered under the Societies Act, those are the 3 components of Nova Scotia's small producer exemption. And yes, if you declare that you are exempt, you are not required to register with Divert Nova Scotia, but you are required to keep records on file that we could, as part of auditing activity, eventually we will be reaching out to some of those exempt producers to confirm that's the case. I would say we do have some exempt producers registered in our portal. So we did build in functionality if somebody happens to find themselves in our system and starts to create an account, but then realizes that they are within those thresholds and would be exempt, they can check off that they're exempt, and they wouldn't be we wouldn't be reaching out to them regarding supply reporting or things like that, but they would just, again, sit there in the system and be noted as exempt. So.
Sorry, thank you, Alana. We'll move on to our next question from Paula, who is asking if currently in Ontario, we are billed 2 invoices, one from Stewardship Ontario and the other for circular materials. Is it going to be the same in Nova Scotia?
Right. So at this time, we are anticipating that it will be similar to Ontario. So it would be 2 different invoices. There are always conversations happening, though, in terms of efficiency, and there has been a suggestion, could we ever align those activities? And, again, that could be a future thing, but I would just suggest that in the near term, they will be 2 separate invoices from 2 separate organizations. So.
Thank you. So the next question is anonymous, but the question is whether you're going to require verification audit reports like RIPRA is requiring.
Great question again. So my understanding in the initial years, there is not a verification audit report required, but that will be the case in future years. And again, I'd have to go back to the regulation just to really be clear about that date. But the initial couple of years, there wouldn't be that verification required.
And maybe just to add, while
yeah, please, if you
verification, I believe the regulation comes into effect as far as the third-party auditing of supply reporting, and any annual reporting is 2030. That doesn't, I guess, alleviate the responsibility of accurate and complete reporting in the years where that verification is not yet required. So,
right.
So all years that you're reporting require the same obligation. That third-party verification just happens to come into effect later once annual reporting has started in 2027. Will be 2030 where that obligation begins.
Right. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. The next question is from Eric, and I think it's more of a statement, but we'll proceed as to see how we can address it. It seems that it would be more efficient if Divert NS was to issue invoices to the pro directly instead of managing more than 340 invoices and payments, along with building this feature into its portal. Others have made the same comments, and ultimately Divert NS admin fees will be recovered from producers. So it would seem that Divert NS should include that into its consultation instead of ruling it out from the start.
Sure. Definitely appreciate the comment, Eric. And certainly, one of the harmonization activities that we have done is when we our regulation does obligate producers directly, requires data to be provided directly to Divert Nova Scotia. And so when we were looking for an IT system to be able to do that, we thought it was really important to harmonize with the Ontario and Alberta. It's a model, it's their portal that's been developed by PwC. And when it comes to this particular functionality you're reflecting on in terms of invoicing and having the pro be able to be part of the invoicing system, the functionality for that does not exist in that portal at this time. So it's a question in terms of, if the portal was to be enabled to allow this activity, as you've noted, there would be a cost attached to that. And at this time, Divert Nova Scotia just made the decision that we're not willing to take on that cost ourselves. But because we're in regular contact with other jurisdictions, because we know there's also a desire from the pro, in particular circular materials, to have that functionality, it's, again, that's why I refer to it as potentially a future efficiency piece for us. But it just was something that at this time we were, again, trying to be mindful of expenses. We just weren't willing to take on that functionality ourselves, but we'd be looking if we could share costs amongst jurisdictions, if the pro wanted to be part of that financing of that functionality. I think those are conversations we're definitely open to. And yeah, so it, again, could happen in the future.
Thanks. We'll move to the next question from Ellen. So the question is, once I submit the data in your portal, do I submit to circular materials as well?
So in terms of the data, so as a producer, you have a choice. So you can choose to supply the data to Divert Nova Scotia directly, or you can choose to delegate to a producer responsibility organization. So in our case, Circular Materials, and they could submit that data to us on your behalf. So I guess my answer would be, if you choose to delegate to the pro, then you would just submit your data to Circular Materials. And then at that point, they would be responsible for putting it into our system on your behalf. The one thing I guess I would note as a follow-up is in our regulation, when that does happen, as I mentioned in the presentation, there is an attestation that's required by the regulation. So I would just note there'd be a standard form that the producer would fill out just to declare that that data was correct and that, again, the pro was submitting it on their behalf. So
great. The next question is from Naomi. If we are already registered under circular materials in Nova Scotia, do we still need to do so again with Divert NS?
Right. So it is two separate registrations. And again, I appreciate that's, not always easy, but for Divert Nova Scotia, you are required to come into our EPR portal, and registration really just takes 5 minutes or so. There's some basic information around creating an account, providing a key contact and their information, and some other just, basic information about your business to get registered. So yeah, it is a separate activity, and we would want you to register directly with us.
Thank you. So the next question comes from Anna. And the question is, how is Divert NS addressing the pressing problem of non-participants and free riders? Ontario's Resource Recovery Productivity Authority, RIPRA, has not, in my opinion, been robust in addressing this. What is the plan with Divert NS?
Sure. So again, great question. We're very familiar with the issue of free riders and very aware that as a producer, you are expecting us to work hard to reduce the number of free riders. I would say, we're very early stages in our oversight role. And so we're, getting off the ground in terms of, building this portal for functionality. We're looking at things like fees, but also we're, starting to dig into things like our compliance framework and what that will look like. I would say, again, because we're early stages, a lot of the work we're doing right now is just looking at our list of who's registered, working with other jurisdictions. They've been able to share who's registered in their region. Looking at even circular materials has been great to be able to share their current list of producers. So we're doing the best we can really at this point. It's just identifying the obligated producers. And I would say as we evolve and as we, over the next year or two, we'll look to, as we develop compliance frameworks and have tools to allow us to go out, I think, that is a goal, is to reduce the free riders as much as possible. But again, we'll look to work with producers to do that. So
thank you. The next question is from Anthony. The question is, any suggestions how much we should budget for Divert NS oversight fee in 2025?
Sure. I wish I had an answer. I do fully understand. This is a question Jackie actually had done a presentation last week to producers, and it was a common theme that everybody wants to be able to budget. because we're so very early stages in terms of our fee setting, in terms of just, again, our oversight role. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that today, but I would just suggest that we're diligently working on that part of our division, and we will share as much as we can as we know more. But unfortunately, I don't really have much at this point to share in terms of what that would look like.
All right, we'll move to the next question, which is, in the automotive industry, we use an approved calculator to determine the volumes of paper and packaging we remit. It is difficult to determine what materials are sold over the counter at our dealerships. I'm not sure what the question here is, and so unfortunately it's anonymous. So if perhaps the person who wrote that statement, if you could perhaps provide a more specific question, and we'll make sure to address it when we see it come back through. So I'll move on to the next question from Ellen. We have some main accounts who will not provide us details of items shipped out of the province. Do we just do an estimate on a scale on store level?
Sure. So in terms of how you actually calculate your supply data, we're just working through sort of the approved methods in Nova Scotia, what we will look to do. So again, we're really just finalizing some research, looking at other jurisdictions in terms of, what's an approved method in Alberta or Ontario, and how does that reflect in Nova Scotia. So at this time, I don't have a lot of detail about what that would look like, but I would just say that's the focus of our next webinar. So when I mentioned that in May, we'll come back to you. That's the time when we're really going to dig into what exactly are the designated materials that are going to be captured here in Nova Scotia, and also what are the approved methodologies in terms of calculating your supply data. So I would just say stay tuned on that one. And certainly, hopefully you can attend in May, or at any time, I would say in May, you could reach out to Divert for more information.
Thank you. The next question is, with EPR, will beverage container program be eliminated or will it continue?
Yeah, so no, the beverage container recycling program will continue in Nova Scotia. The deposit refund program is written into the Nova Scotia Environment Act. There's a desire to keep the program running. So all of that material is dealt with separately through the beverage program. It will not fall into the PPP program.
Right. The next question is from Eric. So again, I think it might be a statement more than a question. Please consider including the registrant number on the list of registrants that you will publish. If we can publish. This helps distributors and retailers track their supplier status and is needed to improve the accuracy of supply reporting. So I think that's more of a comment and a consideration there from Eric as opposed to a question. The next question then is, I think, a clarification. Does Divert NS pay fees directly to circular materials?
So that would be a no. Again, producers will pay fees to Divert Nova Scotia, again, on a cost recovery basis for activities specifically related to oversight. And separately, producers would pay fees directly to circular materials, and those are for costs related to the operation, so the collection, processing, marketing of the recyclable materials. So two separate fees, but going from producer to those respective organizations.
Thanks, Alana. The next question is from Michael. Do we need to report on all packaging material or only those that have current recycling programs? And then there's an example, flexible plastic that is combined with other material, or packaging component that is made up of both plastic and metal and is not easily separated.
So as I noted, we are just working now on finalizing our list of designated materials. Part of our research has been to look at other jurisdictions to see, what's in and what's out in other jurisdictions. And I would note that, being very familiar with curbside programs here in Nova Scotia and looking at those designated materials list, there is a lot of complex packaging that is considered designated in other jurisdictions that I expect would be on our list as well, would be included. So yeah, I would say it's pretty comprehensive of what will be in, even if it is a multi-material type packaging. I believe Circular Materials does have end markets for even those types of packaging.
The next question is just a follow-up to the exempt producer.
Sure.
So the question is I think, how would Divert NS prefer that an exempt producer declare that status? Should they email confirming that status, or would there be a preference to come into the portal and register as an exempt producer? And just a follow-up to the
Yeah.
previous.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we haven't really we don't have a suggested way. We just trust if a producer is exempt, they've determined they're exempt. We aren't necessarily still encouraging you to come into the portal. I mean, you certainly can. That's an option. You certainly can reach out by email. We've had producers that have just dropped us an email to say, I've reviewed the reg, I've looked at the small producer definition, and I believe I fall within it. But I know there's lots of companies as well who've just reviewed the regulations themselves and have decided they're exempt and carried on. So again, if you're inclined, you're welcome to come into the portal, but again, not required. So
Thank you. So I think the next question has been the answer has been addressed. It's whether Divert NS will recognize the sector calculators methodologies used across the country for determining supply data. I think, Alana, you've suggested that that is all under review and determination, and the scan of other jurisdictions is included in that, and more to come on that in the next webinar session. So I think
yeah, and really, yeah, I would just add again, we fully understand harmonization is really important to producers to make things easier for you. So we really hope that's the case, that our methodologies will be very, very similar, if not exactly the same as what you're dealing with in other jurisdictions. But we'll definitely keep you posted.
The next question comes from Sylvain. So knowing that we are delivering materials in warehouses outside of Nova Scotia that are subsequently transferred to Nova Scotia by a retailer, the question then is, does Divert NS, will Divert NS allow us to report the volume of material based on the percentage of the Nova Scotia population instead of direct shipments made that would not reflect the subsequent transfers made by the retailers? So I think, again, same vein of methodology question here. And so again, Sylvain, I think, again, more to come on that. But thank you for that specific question. Again, stay tuned for more information on these scenarios. So I'll go to the next question, which is, a third-party verification is more burdensome than the actual reporting. Does Divert NS care from that point of view that's just been shared? It costs us more money to hire a third-party CPA than our actual fee for packaging fees to RIPRA itself. It's an obnoxious requirement.
Yeah, and fair enough. I think, again, the verification piece is outlined in the Nova Scotia regulation. So it's not really something that Divert Nova Scotia has control over. And again, I don't believe it starts, sorry, Steph, did you say 2030 when it's targets?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so it is a little ways out, and whether things could change between now and then, but I appreciate your comment. And but again, because it's a regulatory requirement, that is something that government in Nova Scotia controls. It's not anything that Divert Nova Scotia has control over.
So we'll move to the next question, is what is the deadline for signing up with the pro?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't know the exact deadline. We are in constant communication with Circular Materials, though. We meet with them bi-weekly just to keep abreast of everything that's happening on their end, and we share our updates. But so I could certainly, if you're not already connected with Circular Materials, I would either you could contact them directly to ask that question, or if you want to follow up with us after this webinar, we can connect you so that you can get an answer to that.
The next question comes from Paul. Will you require an attestation form to be signed by the producers when submitting the supply report?
So yes, so sorry, if you are submitting directly, So you have chosen to come into the portal and you're providing your own supply data. There is no attestation required. It's the case where a producer chooses to delegate the supply reporting to the pro. And in that case, when the pro is providing the supply data, that attestation form is required in regulation. Hopefully that clarifies.
So this just a follow on to the previous automotive question. And again, we won't be able to answer today, but will you allow us to use the approved automotive calculator as we do with all the other provinces? So again, we'll take that into consideration as that's those decisions are being made.
Yep.
So I think the last question we have is it might be more of a statement. Hopefully the requested attestation to allow CM to report supply data is one time and not required annually. So question and statement maybe there.
Question statement. I feel it's probably annual, but honestly, at this point, I think I would suggest that we'll have to go back on that to confirm with government. But I believe it's likely an annual activity because you're confirming the specific data that's being submitted on a given year. So, but yeah, we can certainly, if you're interested in, if you want to reach out again directly, we can do a little bit of follow up with government on that just to confirm.
Okay. Sorry, there are a couple other questions that just came in.
Yeah, all good.
Just to build on the attestation form, where do we obtain the attestation form?
Right. So it's under development. It will live in our EPR portal. So there'll be access to a standard template provided by Divert Nova Scotia that the producer would be signing off on. So nothing you have to create, something that Divert Nova Scotia will provide when we open again in July with our new increased functionality related to supply data reporting.
There's one more question. It is anonymous, and I may need someone to type this in. The question is, where can we sign the NPSA? I'm not sure, Elena, if you're familiar with that acronym and why is it required? So for the individual who did type that question, if you wouldn't mind clarifying the acronym NPSA so we can try and help answer that question.
I think that's the agreement, if I can just jump in, based
Oh, sure,
on
Jackie.
some of the information I've seen with producers and the pro. If I'm correct there, but I think that's their agreement. So you would need to go back to the pro to sign off on that. That Divert Nova Scotia doesn't have that. So
yeah, that was the confirmation there. It's the agreement for circular materials. So thank you, Jackie. Oh, and National Producer Services Agreement. Thank you. So let me just more questions, a couple more. Oh, we just have folks just chiming in to say it's with circular materials. Everyone's helping out. Thank you very much. So I think that is the conclusion of our questions. So thank you everyone for submitting those questions, terrific questions. And I'll turn it over to Elena and Jackie to conclude.
Sure. Well, again, I would just say thanks so much for attending today. We know everyone's really busy, but we appreciated you participating in the webinar. We certainly appreciate all the questions and happy to answer whatever questions you want to ask. So please feel free if something comes up after the webinar that you want to reach out, you can contact myself or Jackie directly. Or as I mentioned, we have our EPR support email. So always happy to hear from you and looking forward to working together as we continue to roll this out through 2024. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much. Have a great day.